My name is Paul Morrison. I'm the Johnson County District Attorney. And some of you might be wondering why every year in this country there are thousands and thousands of people that are killed by drunk drivers. And in our county alone, which is a rather small part of the metropolitan area, just in Johnson County every year we file over 2,000 DUI cases. So it's a very common occurrence, and unfortunately it's a very dangerous and deadly occurrence.
My name is Kelly Summerlin, and I'm the director of the Victim Assistance Unit in the Johnson County District Attorney's Office. On behalf of the District Attorney, the Probation Department, and the panelists for this evening's program, we'd like to welcome you and extend to you an invitation to gain insight into the oftentimes tragic alcohol and drugs with driving. The sanctions for drinking and driving are many, and one of them is your attendance here this evening. A format such as this has often been called cruel and unusual punishment, but I think that you will see that punishment is not our intent or purpose. We do want you to acknowledge your responsibility as a driver on our streets. We want you to realize that you have a choice. The people you will hear from tonight do not have a choice. It was taken away from them. You, however, still have choices to make, and we are here tonight to encourage you to make the right ones. Our panelists want you to know that they are not professional speakers. They will speak to you tonight from the perspective of your neighbor, your coworker, your friend. They want you to understand that it could well be you or your loved ones up here on the stage. They will simply tell you their story and ask you to take away with you this evening what you will. Our first speaker will be Mary Lou Bells. Mary is here because of an incident that occurred on September 24, 1988, near Gardner, Kansas, that took the life of her daughter, Barbara, and Barbara's unborn child, John Layton. Mary?
The day that Barbara died, it was a beautiful day. It was full of hope and promise. And we were really excited with the birth of the baby being only 5 weeks away. We had given her a baby shower the week before she died, 1 week to the day. That day she had went shopping with her mother-in-law. They went to a craft show. And Barbara had bought me some Christmas gifts. And she had spent the day with her mother-in-law just enjoying it and having a good time. I almost called her that day to ask her to come by the house before she went home. But I got busy and time slipped away and I didn't call. I've often wondered if that would have made a difference. But you can only take yourself so long. About 4:30 in the afternoon, Barbara left her in-laws and started home. But there was 2 young men who had been drinking all afternoon in the Tumbleweed Inn in Gardner. And unfortunately, they decided to leave at a time that would make them connect with her. These 2 young men, neither one was fit to drive. They had both had way too much to drink. But they took off driving, and they were driving fast and recklessly. And there was a couple sitting across the street at the Sonic Drive-In. They had stopped to get a little bit to eat. They were driving so erratic that this couple decided to follow them and try to get a license number to give to the sheriff's department to try to keep them from having an accident. But these young men were driving so fast that this couple couldn't keep up with them, and they were doing 80 miles an hour. But luckily, they had got close enough to get a license number before the car got away from them. When they topped the hill above Four Corners out on Highway 56, which is a 2-lane highway, They saw an accident down at the bottom of the hill, and they figured it was the two young men who was involved in the accident. But when they got there, it wasn't. It was my daughter and my grandson. These young men had come up behind my daughter's car, and she was never one to speed. She always drove the speed limit. And they decided to go around her. She wasn't going fast enough. But when they went to pass her, there was a mail truck coming from the other direction. And there wasn't enough time to get around her. So John Knoll put the car back in behind her. And instead of just keeping the wheel turned and going off the side of the road where nobody would get hurt, for some reason, he decided to hit her. And when he hit her, he didn't let off. He deliberately pushed her in front of the mail truck. She didn't stand a chance. The impact split the car in half. Threw her out of the car. She hit the windshield of the mail truck and landed in the ditch. My grandson was torn from her womb. He was killed instantly, and she died within 2 minutes. The coroner said that she couldn't have lived over 2 minutes. Every bone in her face was crushed. Every vital organ was ruptured. She had called my son-in-law before she left to tell him she was on her way home. So when she didn't show up at home, Stephen went looking for her. He came upon the accident, and he knew she couldn't have survived. Barbara was always a person that could see good in everything. No matter how bad it was, there was always some light at the end of the tunnel that she could see from it. So when she died and I was having such a hard time handling the situation, I decided the only way I could handle it was to turn it around and make something positive come from her death. The only positive I can make come from Barbara and John Layton's deaths is to see that someone else doesn't have to go through the hell that I've been through. If I can influence any one of you tonight to either have a designated driver or not to drink and drive, to have someone come get you, or to stay wherever you're at drinking, then I've done something wonderful in her memory. Not only for her memory, but for your families, and maybe somebody else's family out there on the road that you might meet. I always taught my children, don't drink and drive. If you don't want to stay where you're at, call Daddy and I and we'll come get you, or have a designated driver. And I was very lucky. My kids listened. But it didn't help us in Barbara's case because somebody else's kid didn't listen. Somebody made a stupid decision and cost my daughter and my grandson their lives. I know we all make dumb decisions at some time in our life. And usually we're lucky enough that it doesn't cost somebody else theirs. Our lives are so fragile and we take them so for granted. If any one of you could feel what I've been feeling, if you could just wear the grief I've been wearing since that day, just for 24 hours, it wouldn't be anybody in this room out there drinking and driving. I went through a lot of different feelings before I got to the point where I knew that I wanted to do something positive. Yes, I wanted to get a hold of the kid that killed my daughter, and I wanted to just shake him till his teeth rattled. And then I went through the feelings of wanting him to go through alcohol and drug abuse treatment so that when he gets out of jail, he won't be a threat to anybody else. And I went through the frustration after I found out that I couldn't force that on him. And in my mind, I should have had that right since he took so much from me. You go through a lot of irrational feelings before you get to the logic ones. The problem is the pain doesn't go away. It lessens with time, but it's always there. Her birthday's coming up not very far away, May the 11th. And with every day as it gets closer, it gets harder. Her wedding anniversary will be coming up in July. It's going to be very tough for Stephen. She had a way of making every day really special. And all the holidays, she was really a holiday person. She was like me. She was a kid about holidays. I'd like for all of you just to sit back and try to put yourself in the position of a young man that took my daughter's life. What would your family be feeling? What would the victim's family be feeling when you heard the judge sentence you to jail? Can any one of you say that you really want to, if you don't care about yourselves, do you really want your family or someone else's family to have to go through that? I imagine there are a lot of you here who have children. You never expect to bury your children. You expect them to always be there. Yes, always be there for you to worry about and fuss over. And I can tell you, I've buried grandmothers and aunts and uncles and my father. But I've never had a burial that was as hard as laying my daughter to rest. When you go out to the grave after you've laid them to rest, it is so hard because you know how much that life was wasted, how much potential was there. And it was such a senseless death. It wasn't caused by an illness they couldn't cure. It was caused by somebody's irresponsible actions. I hope when you leave here tonight after listening to us that you realize that we're not angry with you. We're not angry with society. But we feel there have to be changes made. There has to be awareness made. People have to understand that it's not a victimless crime, that you're not just hurting yourself when you're doing things like that. People never stop to think when they go out drinking that if they get behind the wheel, they're not going to react as fast. They're not going to maybe notice that car coming as fast as they would if you go out and drink and get behind the wheel of that car, or smoke a marijuana cigarette and get behind the wheel of the car. Anything that impairs your ability to drive that car could put somebody else 6 feet under, just like my daughter. Could tear up another family. just weeks ahead. So every first for her has been bittersweet for me, because I know John Layton should have been right behind her. With her first step, with the first two, the first word. It's been really, really hard. But I guess enough time has elapsed now that I'm able to look at it a little more objectively. But it's still very hard. Every night, every 3 months when I get up here, I go home with knots in my stomach. And for several days, I don't sleep nights. Because it brings all the pain back. And I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could help somebody. So if I help just one of you, or if any one of you would like to talk with me, you can contact Kelly at the District Attorney's Office and she'll put you in touch with me. I'd be willing to sit down one-on-one with any one of you and talk with you about it. All I want to do is help you, to help yourselves, and maybe somebody else. Thank you.
The man that killed Sam's wife, Lottie, was convicted in June of 1989. The date that Lottie was killed on held particular significance for 21 years prior to her death. Lottie died on her son's birthday. A day to celebrate the birth of his son will forever be shadowed by his wife's death. Sam?
To begin with, I have to tell you that what I'm telling you here, I put together last August for the first session. I kind of updated it for the next session 3 months later. And I think I should have done it again. But I think you understand, I can't read those notes too many times to myself. So if there is some maybe gaps in time frame, or the time isn't quite right, or on one or the other thing doesn't quite feel right, just forgive me for that. When I was asked in the later part of the trial to participate in this panel, I agreed. I would have done anything to have some impact. Before the time of the first session, that was in August, I was almost ready to tell Kelly that I couldn't do this. After a visit to the wife's grave, I decided to do it after all. It was not easy then, and now for the next 10, 12, 14 months, you try to survive, push it in the background, and then all of a sudden you have to dig it all out and force yourself to remember. So it isn't any easier now. Last Sunday, after a long interruption, I went to the cemetery again. The first crocuses are out now. She was always happy to see the new flowers. It's little things like that that always tend to pull you back down in the hole. What I try to tell you is that neither of one of us here is here for the fun. We are not here to accuse or criticize. Our hope is that we might be able to paint you a picture of what could happen to you and your loved ones if irresponsible behavior is allowed to take over. The tragedies affect the victims just as well as the offender. Would have picked her up on the way home from work. I was a little bit delayed. I told her that I had to, no, she told me I had to pick up groceries. I had to take gas. I stopped at the gas station. The grocery store was a little jammed, and so I was a little later than I should have been. When I drove home, I drove the normal stretch where she said she would be. I went home, couldn't see her, she wasn't home. The dinner was on the table, or at least half the dinner, ready to be warmed up, so I knew she couldn't be far. I said to myself, I must have missed her somewhere, and went back in the truck, made the same stretch 3-4 times. After the last return, I noticed that some mail that we had taken care of at the neighbors was not on the table no more, and I figured, well, she just over at the neighbors. I called the neighbor. No, she was not there. She had brought the mail over earlier, but she wasn't there. By now, it's 2 hours later. And I think you all agree that I lived long enough to know that women never change their mind. But I figured maybe this time she did, and there was an alternate route that she could have taken, and I thought, well, maybe she did after all. So now I want you to follow me. I picked up the flashlight. I was half walking, half running down that country road. I shouted her name over and over and over again. I got down to the dam, nothing. Drove up the dam to the other road, no answer. And all of a sudden you feel that big bang in the chest, and you know something terrible has happened. I returned home and called the police. The dispatcher said they would be looking out for her. But 5 minutes later, I see a patrol car going up the road. I followed him, and I caught him when he made a turn in the corner. I explained the situation, and he told me that a person has to be missing for 24 hours before they can declare him missing. But I think somehow he sensed that there might be something to my story. There was something wrong, and because he asked me, did you call the neighbors? Did you check everything? Did you look in the backyard? Sure, I looked in every hole I could find. And so he said he couldn't act on his own, but he would call his supervisor. He did that, and luckily this man was feeling the same way, so it wasn't 10 minutes later that Lenexa police was out there, 5, 6, 7 men. They told me to stay home with one of the officers, and he was in contact with them through walkie-talkie. There was some anxious moments. We waited and waited. He went out once in a while, take contact with him, and about an hour later he came in. He said, Sam, sit down. They found her. She's dead. On my way home, I passed the scene of the accident maybe 5 or 10 minutes later. The offender left the scene. He had the opportunity to tell an officer that stopped and asked if he needed help. He said, no, I just lost the hubcap. In the meantime, my wife was bleeding to death on the bottom of the embankment. Help could have been there in minutes through the officer's radio. I could not comfort her. I could not say I'm sorry. I could not say I love you. He robbed me of this opportunity. Say you do that nice thing that you always wanted to do. Was a little bit too late for me. I had to learn the hard way, but I hope it makes you think. What are the impacts on me and my family? I was lucky to have had a wife that raised two very independent children. I hate to admit that they supported me as much during those past months as I supported them. My daughter got married 7 months before the accident. She's a nurse, and she sees a lot of shadows. That does not mean that it's easier for her. When we talk, we both don't get any answer to our questions. Why did mother have to die? My son is still in college. As I mentioned before, she died on his birthday. How is he going to handle this in the future? He is, or I should better say he was, a healthy, happy 21-year-old kid. A few months back, he went to the doctor to find out what was wrong with his stomach. He has an ulcer. And I might as well add here, I said I still goes to college. He had to quit for the semester. He's working now. He just couldn't concentrate. How about me? Somehow you get the strength to hold out to those first weeks. You make funeral arrangements. You take care of what's necessary. And I try to go back to work, which I could not do for another 2 weeks. When I brushed my workbench, I always saw her laying there on the table just like I saw in the morgue. I had to force myself to do something. On the way home, I have to pass the spot where it happened every day. I have to look at it from the top of the hill till I'm over the bridge. There's no other way out. I get home to an empty house. First, I wanted to burn everything down to not have to see it no more. Then you realize that this is all you have to remember. Next morning comes, and all the following mornings, and you finally realize that that's the way it's going to be. Somebody said to me before last Christmas that it hopefully will be a better Christmas than the last. I didn't argue. It really was not. The first Christmas, that was a month after the accident, you're still numb. You just go through the motions. The last Christmas, you know, the reality sets in. You know that what happened, and so it doesn't necessarily make it any easier. Hopefully with time it will. There are economic impacts also. Lottie had a part-time job after the kids were grown. She took care of my book work. She took care of house and garden. We had a home-cooked meal every night. I never really fully appreciated what I had till I lost it. I talked to a friend that is in the nanny business just a couple of weeks ago, and she had a out-of-town request from a customer that his 28-year-old wife was killed with 2 little kids. Now, I know what I went through, but I sure feel sorry for that man when you think what it takes to farm out 2 little kids and take care of the rest too. I sure wish him well. I go to work now again. Well, you have to. The stress is gone, but I'll go to work. Lots of times I hear the sirens in the way. The siren, Whether it's the police or the fire or the ambulance, it's all the same. It's just like a overture to a movie that you don't want to watch, but you have to. You can close your eyes, you still see it. Over and over and over again. So please help us to save somebody else from having to go through that hell. Thank you.
And that of his wife and two sons changed dramatically, suddenly, and forever. Before July 26th, Jim's wife, Esther Marie, had spent 5 years as a school teacher and was embarking on a new career as a mortgage loan underwriter. She was a proud woman and a high achiever, a loving wife and mother, competent, capable, and depended on by her husband and their 2 young sons. Jim and Marie were in their car traveling down 103rd Street in Overland Park when they met a woman who would shatter the goals, the dreams, the futures, and the lives of this young family. It was a lovely day, and a woman had been sunbathing and enjoying the day. She'd been arguing with her boyfriend. She had also been drinking. She got in her car and started the engine, still arguing with her boyfriend, who was also a passenger in her vehicle. She was in her car less than 5 minutes when her car met Jim and Marie. It could be said that Jim and Marie survived the crash. The dictionary defines survive as to live on, to continue to function and prosper. After Jim tells you his story, I want you to decide to what degree Jim, his wife Marie, and their sons have survived.
July 26, 1987 was a Sunday, and it was hot. It was a typical Kansas City summer day. Marie, as ambitious as she was, really enjoyed working around the house, and she had a project going on that day. And I got home from church, and she wanted to do some wallpapering and needed some stuff from the store, and she asked me to go with her. So we jumped in the car and headed out the door, and 2 boys hadn't had lunch yet. I guess Marie got involved enough with the project that she just forgotten about lunch, so they asked us to pick something up at Taco Bell or something like that. And it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And we had to live out in South Overland Park, and we got in our car and headed north on Antioch, and then turned right to head east on 103rd Street. And some of you that are familiar with that area will know that there's a Brookridge Country Club there. And what I didn't realize until after the accident, even though I'd been by there probably hundreds of times, was that there's a hill there out in front of Brookridge Country Club. And to the east of the Brookridge Country Club, that 4-lane road's divided by medians. But out in front of Brookridge Country Club, there are no medians. Well, this lady and her boyfriend, as Kelly said, had been drinking at the swimming pool of the apartment complex right next door to Brookridge Country Club, and they'd gotten in a big argument. And she jumped in a Cadillac Eldorado, big car, and immediately had problems with it, as witnesses recounted to us later on. As a matter of fact, most of the details of what I'm about to describe you, I don't remember because I was knocked unconscious myself. But there were a lot of witnesses, and the police report was really well detailed. But evidently what happened was after I made that right turn and was heading east on 103rd Street, I was in the outside lane. And at the same time, this lady pulled out and was coming westbound, and she was bouncing from curb to curb. She had no control over the car at all. When she got to the top of that hill, she came clear across 4 lanes, hit the curb, swung back in, and hit the front right of our car, which was a Honda. Of course, a much smaller car. I'd like to say, fortunately, because we had our seat belts on, things were better than they would have been otherwise. I mean, they would have been. We both would have been dead had we not had our seat belts on. But unfortunately, because we were hit from the front right side, the Cadillac just crushed the Honda and opened up the right side, just like a can opener. And because Marie was strapped in her seatbelt, the center post of the passenger door crushed in on top of her as her head whipped back and forth. The force of that ripped her ear off. The glass came in and cut us both to shreds. You know, Marie's right hip was completely crushed and her collarbone was broken. Fortunately, because there were witnesses, an ambulance was called right away, and we were taken to Humana Hospital, which is probably about 3 miles away from there. When they arrived at the hospital, we were both unconscious, but Marie obviously was the worst of the two, so the emergency trauma team began working on her, and they worked on her, and they worked on her for about 4 or 5 hours, and they stabilized her, and they sewed her ear back on, and they reconstructed her hip, and they did a marvelous job of saving her life. That same time as all that was going on, my boys it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they began to realize that something was wrong, because we were real good about letting our kids know where we were, and they were hungry and still hadn't eaten lunch. Well, one of my relatives came by the house, and they had been notified that we were in the hospital, and they had to break the news to the boys. And the news they had was that I was hurt and I had broken bones, but their mother was in worse shape, and there was a chance she wasn't going to live. And I think one of the things that really hurts me the most is to realize what must have been going through their heads at that time. What happened was the relatives took them over to the hospital, and they got to see me, and they got to sit with me in the emergency room and talk to me and hold my hand and make sure I was okay. Well, my oldest son, they still don't know what the word was on my wife, and he left to wash the blood off his hands in the restroom, and he came out, and they just wheeled his mother by, and she had a code blue, and they were pretty sure that she wasn't gonna live. Well, they got her revived, and then we had to wait a couple days to find out whether or not the head injury that she had suffered would cause either death or permanent damage. And they were able to do, after 2 days, do a CAT scan on her head and realize that her brain was swelling up inside of her skull. And what it was doing, because it was swelling, it was crushing the brain cells. And if it continued to swell, she would die. And because they couldn't determine what the type of damage there was, they didn't know whether or not she'd be in a vegetative state, even if she did live. Well, what's happened from that point on is that we never really know, we still don't know what Marie's outcome will be. But it's been a long process. And to go back to that first week, what happened was they got her stabilized, and she was in the intensive care room. And I don't know if any of you have ever been in an intensive care room with a trauma victim, but they have tubes sticking out of everywhere. They have needles sticking in everything. In Marie's case, her face was so swollen you couldn't recognize her. And, of course, she was in a coma and unresponsive. Well, 5 days after the accident, she had a cardiac arrest and went code blue. My boys had just arrived at the hospital when that happened, and so all hell broke loose, and there was pandemonium, and they were told again that their mother might not survive. But she did survive, and they stabilized her, and she was in a coma for 3 weeks. On August 17th, the Humana Hospital staff needed to move her out of there and move her into some type of a rehabilitative center. So we got sent up to Bethany Rehab Center up in Kansas City, Kansas, where they're staffed to do rehabilitation for head-injured people. They did tests on her to see whether or not she was going to be able to swallow, because it's a common problem with head-injured people that they can't swallow. So they continued to feed her intravenously. After about 6 weeks at Bethany Hospital, she had her eyes open, and it looked like she might be tracking people as they walked across the room. And that was the first sign that there was any real life in her, that she was no longer, quote, just a vegetable. And I remember the first time she spoke, and I think it probably is, it's a lot like young parents would feel the first time their child speaks. It was just a real revelation, and we were just real happy about it. But it was just continued to be a struggle from day to day to watch her go through this, to watch her come out of this coma. As she did come out of this coma, what she started to do was to move uncontrollably from side to side in her bed, and they call that a ranging motion, to go side to side. She was having problems with the therapy that they were trying to conduct with her because she just didn't have the strength, and the medication she was on made her sleep during the day, and she was awake at night. On October 6th, we decided to move her to another rehab facility called Rebound. And it's out in Lee Summit, Missouri, or was out in Lee Summit, Missouri, and they're geared towards intensive rehabilitation, speech rehabilitation, occupational therapy, speech therapy, music therapy, neuropsychology. There's just a whole battery of things that needed to be tried with my wife to bring her back from the vegetative childlike state that she was in. And I remember how thrilled I was the first time we took her there. And we took her into her room and put her in her bed. And you got to realize up to this point she said very little that was understandable, and what she did say was in a soft whisper. The first day when we arrived and put her in her bed, there's this big strapping guy who's the head of physical therapy walked in and without any hesitation at all said, "Hi, Marie, my name is Eddie." Without hesitation, Marie said, "Hi, Eddie, my name's Marie, I'm glad to be here." And it just floored us that she was able to do that. This is all part of the ups and downs of going through a rehab with a head injured person, because it wasn't all just great news from that point on. And Marie didn't talk again for a while, and she didn't walk, and she didn't have the strength to do much of anything. But she spent 16 months at Rebound out at Lee Summit going through a painful daily regimen of therapy. And I think the worst part of it for her was a fear that she didn't know what was wrong with her, and the fear that she knew she was afraid to stand up and try to walk. She knew that she was afraid to be on the edge of her bed, and she required somebody to do everything for her. And I remember how humiliating I thought it must be for her, because she didn't have any bowel and bladder control. And I'd go in to visit her, and because of this ranging motion she was going through, I'd walk in and she'd be covered with the contents of her diaper. And I just thought that was probably the most humiliating thing in the world to happen to somebody, and to not know that, what they were doing, to be able to control it. Well, Marie's a fighter. She's an achiever. And she continued to struggle along, and again, none of the therapists, none of the hospital staff could really tell us what was going to happen to Marie, what the outcome eventually was going to be. But she continued to show some progress. Because the insurance companies are interested in seeing progress and seeing an end to this type of thing, what they finally decided to do was to support Marie going to what's called a transitional facility, where they teach people independent living skills, the kinds of things that we all take for granted, like how to cook and do your laundry and take a shower and comb your hair and brush your teeth, all those real basic things. Well, we were hopeful that when she entered that program in March of 1989, that's 6 to 8 months from that point, if everything went well, she might be able to come out and care for herself. Well, it didn't turn out that way, because the most devastating thing that's happened to Marie is probably not her crushed hip or her ear being ripped off or any of those broken bones or cuts and lacerations or any of the humilities she went through. She has a severe short-term memory problem, which means that she can't remember whether or not she ate 5 minutes ago. She doesn't know whether or not she brushed her teeth 5 minutes ago. Most of the time, she doesn't know where she's at. She doesn't know what day it is. She's incapable of taking care of herself. She's totally dependent on others for that. So the 8 months that she spent at Meadowbrook Ranch out in Gardner, Kansas, we weren't able to accomplish the goals we had hoped to accomplish. And because of that, I spent all last summer knowing that I was going to have to find a long-term solution for Marie. That she wasn't just going to be coming back as Marie and being able to go out and be employed and be able to drive and do the kinds of things that she'd enjoyed doing before the accident. So I spent last summer looking in Arkansas and Tennessee and Colorado and Arizona for a long-term facility for her, knowing that if we did that, that she'd be separated from the family, at least temporarily, but that something needed to be done. Well, what happened was that's a real expensive proposition, and without any help from the insurance companies, the average person isn't able to do that. So that left me with a solution that I really dreaded, but we wound up following through with, and that was to put her in a nursing facility, which is where she's at today. Right now she's at a place called the Healthcare Center at the Forum, which is over near 95th Street and Mission Road. And she's well cared for. Problem I see is that she's half the age of most of the people there. I hate the environment she's in, even though she does get good care, but there aren't any choices right now. And all in all, I guess, I look back on this situation. I was always one of these guys that felt if you stayed off the street after midnight or 1 o'clock, you had a fighting chance of getting home, not getting hit by a drunk. But in this particular case, that just didn't happen. It was less than 2 miles from home. It was a Sunday afternoon. And it just tells me you really don't have any control over your life. I mean, you got control over what you do, but the person on the other end doesn't have any control over the decisions you make. And in my mind, I'm here for the same reason the rest of these people are. I'm really hopeful that we all can make an impact and help you folks make decisions about what's right and wrong. And I appreciate you listening to me. Thanks.
Daughter Christina and severely injured Marcia, her husband, and her son was only 18 years old. His blood alcohol content was a mere 0.05%. Marcia is the senior member of our panel, as her daughter was killed on April 17, 1986. Christina was only 7 years old. Had it not been for the events that occurred on that night in April, Marcia obviously would not be here tonight. Instead, she would be at home, lighting birthday candles on a cake she had baked that day. The birthday celebration would have been for Christina. Tonight would have been Christina's 11th birthday. Marcia has come a long way in working through the maze of feelings and physical injuries. I want to believe the process is a never-ending one, and it's hard work. Marcia has a message for you. It's not anger, and it's not hostility. The message is full of hope for her family and for you.
Good evening. I consider myself at one time a victim, but now a survivor of a vehicle collision. It's a rough road. My story tonight is of the pain and the journey down that road. It's a continuous one. I don't think that it ever stops. I think you just keep traveling it and finding easier ways. But it isn't just the pain that brings me here tonight, but the fight for the living. And I hope that after this evening, we have offered a better understanding to each of you to join in that fight. On April 17, 1986, a young man made choices that night that would not only affect his life forever, but our families as well. He had been to a party, had a few drinks, and then an argument with his girlfriend. I can only assume that when he decided to leave after that argument, it was with the intentions of cooling down. By the time he had made it to his car, his anger and his alcohol were his driving force. He began traveling north on Old Metcalf, and by this time, his youth, his rage, and his Pontiac Firebird were an uncontrollable deadly weapon. His speed was approximately 100 miles per hour in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. He was driving with a suspended driver's license, illegal registration, and no insurance. Our family was returning to our home in Belton, Missouri from Kansas City, Kansas. We had been visiting my mother. It was a Thursday evening. It was a beautiful spring evening. We'd been visiting about how bright the stars were shining, how you could smell the rain in the air. As the drive continued, it was about 9 or 9:30, and the kids fell asleep in the back. So by the time we had reached the intersection, my husband was the only one really alert and concentrating on what was going on. We entered the intersection, and that is when we met this young man. He failed to acknowledge the flashing red light or the stop sign, driving his car into ours. With traveling that fast and not even attempting to stop, we were his brake. Our car was forced to go airborne, and we were thrown from the vehicle, my children remaining. However, my daughter took most of the impact and was killed immediately. And as Kelly mentioned, my 9-year-old son Joshua, my husband, and myself were critically injured. None of us have any clear memories of that night, of the wreck. My earliest memory is of the hospital. I awoke in an emergency room with a bright light in my eyes, and a doctor explained to me that he was sewing up my face and my head. I asked for my family. A nurse was nearby, and she began to explain to me that my husband was nearby and was doing well. She also explained that my son was transferred to a different hospital. She didn't explain that he was transferred by helicopter because of the severe injuries to his heart and lung. Nor did she explain to me that the doctors did not think he would make it through that night. I asked for my daughter, and all she could say was, "Your little girl did not make it." I didn't even understand exactly what she was saying. I was confused, but not really frightened because I had not met reality yet. But with my head pounding and with that information, I was unconscious again. After that, nothing's real clear. I have bits and pieces of the days. I don't have what I could say, this happened on Monday, this happened on Tuesday. But our family, our friends, and the medical staff begin to establish a foundation of love and strength to support us, to get us through this. A few gutsy family members approached me about the funeral. They didn't realize, though, that I had already denied it all, that I had found a peace with that denial, that in my hospital room, in my little sterile suite, I was safe. I was told when to eat, when to bathe, and when to sleep. I didn't need anything else. Everyone kept assuring us that everything was going to be all right, and that's what I chose to believe. I knew that somewhere, somehow, when I got out of here, someone would be taking care of my kids, and I would take over from there. So I refused to participate in that. None of us, our family dealing with their own grief and the struggle to support us and do what was right. My husband had been released a few days earlier, so he was the lucky one. He got to do it all. They gently walked him through the procedure. His main priority was what I approve. Do I regret not participating in it? No, not at all. I don't like the idea. I don't like the thought. And as far as I'm concerned, it was done just fine. There's still a part of me that does not always accept this, that waits for her as I see the children walk down the street. That I don't have the answers to my now 13-year-old son to why this happened, or why this ugly monster was not strung up from a tree that night. After we were released from the hospital, I think I think the moment that the nurse began to tell me and explain to me that my daughter did not make it, that moment changed to a different person. But you fight it. So after I was home and everyone went back to work and back to school, I began to allow my emotions to meet reality. Now I was on a crusade to make this thing right. I had thought about getting a gun and hunting this person down. I had heard that you could get a book at the library to make a bomb. And I was very serious. It was frightening. I was introduced to emotions and in a land now that was totally foreign to me. I fought with two of me, the dying crazy person and the person that I used to know, trying to make them fit into one and be normal. I didn't always know what normal was at that time, but I knew that it could happen, and I wanted it. Deep down inside, I knew I could not take another person's life. I was left to depend on our criminal justice system to make this right. I think I expected miracles, as we do from our medical society and many other sources. On May 23rd, we had a preliminary hearing. My husband was asked to be a witness. That was confusing to me. We didn't remember anything. What could he testify to? They explained it was just a technicality, one of those procedures. He had to testify to being the owner and the driver of the car. He would have to see some 8x10 photographs of our vehicle and say, yes, that was his, and so on and so forth. 5 minutes before we entered the courtroom, he was also informed he would see 8x10 pictures of our daughter lying dead on the road. Could you please identify and say that, yes, you are her father? This would also be the first day that we would meet the man responsible for this. Of course, I think I had him pictured this awful-looking creature. He was a very clean-cut, baby-faced young man. Makes good grades in school, and so on and so forth. He also saw these pictures and sat showing with no emotion at all, while mine were at an all-time high. This was the system that I depended on to make it right. I was outraged. I was furious. I knew I would get the bomb book now. As we progressed through the system, it did get better. We were introduced into the victim witness unit, and they offered us an outlet. I was a mother. I am a protector, a provider. I'm supposed to be doing things for my children. This was the first time that I had been unable to meet their needs in a way like this. I was powerless and helpless, and it was overwhelming me. I didn't have set answers for my 9-year-old son. I couldn't understand myself why his youth had been robbed from him in this way, why he had learned and loved to have the companionship of his sister, and now forced to be an only child. So as we went through the system, it helped. We were able to write letters, have some input in the case. I was desperately trying to do everything the right way. The medical bills were outrageous. I wanted to send one a day to the offender, but I didn't. I did drive by his house one time. I didn't throw a rock, nor a bomb. I fought with reason and just that gut reaction out of anger, desperation. I couldn't make this right. There was nothing I could do to change this. In October of '86, we had the sentencing. He pled guilty to aggravated vehicular manslaughter and driving without a license. He spent 9.5 months in jail, prison, rehab, whatever you call it, correctional institution. And I think I expected some kind of finalizing feeling, some relief, some good feeling. He was off the street. I mean, come on, our system worked. But I was still frustrated. I was still devastated. So as we went on, I knew there would come the day that he would be out, and the judge would have to let him. I knew that he was young, and that he was going to enjoy life again. I knew that he was going to face new beginnings, and probably make the choice to enjoy them. to experience life, to move on, to get through it. And as crippled and as handicapped as I felt, I knew that my family was entitled to that right also. As a unit, the three of us had to stand together, encourage each other, and learn how to experience our new beginnings happily. We have grown. We've come a long way. We can look back. We can know and remember her birthdays or holidays or those silly days with joy. Sorrow walks with us every day. You can't just set it down, although I'd like to sometimes. Coming here tonight, I felt prepared and fine. You know, I've done this before. The closer that microphone moves, the harder my heart pounds. As Kelly said, it is Christina's 11th birthday. I think about how much taller she was. She was very tall. She was almost as tall as her brother. Very slender, long blonde hair, top of her class, prime candidate for a happy, successful life. But yet I'm denied the privilege of sharing in her joy and her celebration. Why? Because of someone's irresponsibility and negligence, someone's unconcern, someone's anger. I could not let that same anger control me. Her death was a senseless death. There was no lessons to be learned. It was not God's will, so on and so forth. There was no reason for it. It's not fair. It's not just. But we had to keep going and take the 7 years that we had with Christina with it. As we've heard, a lot of us have heard of many handicapped people that have learned to overcome their disabilities or work with them. That is what our family had to do. Coming here tonight is one of those things that helped me. I don't want to say go home with the horror stories and, you know, it will go away. These things will go away. You all will go on and live your life and enjoy new beginnings, as that's our right. I would ask that the stories you've heard tonight, think about them. We are real people. We have real lives. They're not just a story. We have the right to enjoy and experience life in its wonderful form, as you do. We also have the responsibility not to deny another person. And as Kelly said, I'm not a polished speaker. I may have babbled through this thing. My hands are sweaty and I walk away just as nervous. But I would like to thank you for your patience and your time. Thank you very much.
That concludes when you signed in this evening an attendance form. This slip is your confirmation that you attended this evening. Marcia, Sam, Jim, and Mary will be coming down to the front of the stage to collect your attendance forms. They must be turned in tonight before you leave. They've also agreed to speak with anyone who has any questions or comments. I'd like to say that we know